introduce Cynthia Norton tonight, and I thought we would actually go upstairs as a group and we will talk about the works in front of the works. We'll start actually in the middle, in between the Charles Wilson Peale and the I-Cing paintings. Anyway, Cynthia's here from Kentucky, and I'll just talk for a minute, and then we'll go up, and I think the way we'll run this is I'm going to start by asking Cynthia a couple of questions. She can then start to talk about her work, and everybody can kind of join in and and ask questions. Is probably the easiest way, and I'll try and steer the conversation to a degree that we actually go around the works and find out what you need to find out about them. But I first came across Cynthia's work when I was in Louisville, and she had moved back to Louisville. I think it was from New York, was it? Yeah. She'd been to New York after she'd finished at the Art Institute of Chicago, and she invited me over to see her work, and then she was doing things in the art community in Louisville, doing performance work and so on, as well as in other places, and I would go and see what she was up to. And then I was invited to curate an exhibition for a festival in Austria, and the theme of that festival was city, and I said to the guy who was organising it, well, can I do something about the city I come from? He said, sure. And so I put together an exhibition of 5 artists who came from Louisville, whose work dealt with vernacular forms and kind of reflected on the idea of living in the place where they lived and in amongst the culture that surrounded that place. Cynthia did a performance which was actually on the second day of the exhibition, I think, wasn't it, in Graz, where we had actually brought together we brought a guy from Kentucky who was one of the other artists who played the guitar, and then we had a professional cellist and a professional opera singer working with her. And the other night, Cynthia opened her show with a performance which actually included 2 professional musicians, a banjo player and a guy who played the fiddle and the mandolin. And I think an important thing to kind of kick off with is that a lot of her work involves this mixing up of what we think of as high and low culture, of actually addressing that divide, whilst at the same time thinking about the culture where she comes from. And in a way, it's equity with culture anywhere else, that it may be very different from the culture of the East Coast. It may be different from what we consider as high culture, but what she's interested in is exploring the relationship between these different forms and somehow synthesizing them together. Let's go upstairs and we'll talk about the first piece that's right in the center of this show and use that as a place to kick off. Like the whole of the Morris Gallery series of shows that we've done over the last couple of years, the challenge of this show is always you're showing in the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. This is not just another space that you're doing this in. Therefore, I've asked every artist who's done this project, which goes back to Jason Russell, Tom the Duke, Hiro Sakaguchi, all the way back to Roxana Perez-Mendez, to think about this collection and how do you respond to this collection, the idea that an artist is working with the weight of history on their shoulders. What we'll talk about here is, to start with, some of the responses that Cynthia had when she came here. You've been here, 4 times now, isn't it? About how these pieces are made and how they work, and particularly this piece here, which is called Mirrorcord, and you can perhaps describe that to us in a second. But first, talk about your response to that challenge that we give to artists, young artists, when they come here and we ask them to do a show in the Morris Gallery series.
Well, at first it's quite hard to believe and take in, and you're a bit nervous about having such an opportunity to speak a voice, and half of what I do is writing the songs or poems that are interacting with the paintings and the concepts that are established through time and history here at the gallery. This piece in particular is something I've wanted to do for a long time. So it's kind of luck when preparation meets opportunity, and you're like, this is the perfect moment to insert my body into an instrument, which is what I've always wanted to do because I've been using an instrument as a mask for a while. So I wanted to take issues and ideas about the body and performance art and be encapsulated in an instrument. And it just so happens that at my studio there was this bookcase that was above, and I had brought it down and just filled it full of my books and stuff. It was just there for me to organize my things. And I kept looking at it and looking at it, and it's sort of, when you're making art, it's a very subconscious thing of objects that come into your life and different things like that. And Nini, which is my persona, is somebody that's supposed to make sense of the objects and things that are around you. So even though I might be using a very common object, it's kind of like transforming the everyday into the extraordinary. So that's where it's coming from. And then I'm from Athens, Kentucky, which is where an avant-garde musician was from, and his name was John Jacob Niles. You may be familiar with some of his more famous folk songs. He wrote Go Away From My Window, and he wrote Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair. And so I grew up where his farm was, and he was actually from Louisville originally, but he lived in Lexington, and so this piece is based on his dulcimer that he made. He was a woodworker also, and he made his own dulcimers that he sang with. So here I'm referencing somebody that's from my home and emulating compositions and different things from his work.
There's always been a kind of mixture of technology and the homemade in what you're doing. At the moment, there's actually a piece of Cynthia's at an exhibition at the Delaware Center for Contemporary Art, which is an exhibition about sort of art that moves, machine-type art. And it's a piece of work that uses one of those washing line structures that has like arms that go out to the side, and you have the strings across between this kind of square. And on each corner of these arms is actually a country dress. And the whole thing spins, not just the whole object, but also each dress spins, as if they've been squared arms. And in this particular one, there's also a sound element, which is almost like a ghost in the museum. You can hear it more clearly around the back, but it's actually you singing a song called Freedom Rings Within. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that interest in the way that you craft objects out of the everyday and then mix them with technological things.
Well, in feminist theory, different things that were considered to be isolating mechanisms, like the washing machine, that kept the woman in the home, was the theory that was very prevalent when I was in graduate school and graduate school in the early 90s, and I felt the opposite of that technology had afforded me the time and different, ways of getting out into the world and creating a voice for myself. So a lot of what I've done is, in World War II, the microphone was the first time that women were allowed or speaking at public political events because of the microphone. And so a lot of my work has to do with this kind of theory of technology and kind of creating the reverse effect of, instead of isolation, actually being heard. And folk music has always been a way for news to travel through popular song, lest we forget some of the important things that we need to know, or maybe it's a murder or something that happened, but the thing is that that form of delivering text through the voice is very important to me and to the background of country music and women's voices being heard.
So let's get round the other side of here.
Sorry.
Let me just ask you quickly about the title of this piece, because it's called Mirror Chord, and it's actually quite, it's very simple how that title comes about, isn't it? Can you just quickly explain that, and how you kind of altered this object? I can open the doors once you do that, actually.
This particular object, I was intentionally at first going to title it after the song, Freedom Reigns Place Within, but in the process of making it, the strings that are making up the instrument's strings are actual picture hanger wire. And on the package it said mirror chord. And you'll see in the videos I use mirror and text and kaleidoscopes, as you can see in these pieces, as a device of, like thinking about psychology, different things like that, maybe even the subconscious. So when I saw the package and it said mirror chord, and I had wired this with picture hanging wire, different gauges, I got really excited, and I was just like, this is one of the reasons we do this, is the beauty of discovery, and just sort of everything coming together at once, or, when you're challenged with solving a problem, and then all of a sudden that problem becomes the beauty that you find.
The performance on Friday started by everybody being actually stuck on the Washington foyer because we locked all the other doors. And we had two musicians who started at the bottom of the stairs, and they were playing as they came up the stairs, and they ended up standing silently one each side by one of the big paintings. And the idea was that the banjo player would be in front of the Gross Clinic, because the banjo is a much more kind of mathematical kind of instrument, and the fiddle player stood in front of Mr. Peel, who obviously is expressing his kind of all-encompassing poetic view of the world. But then, once they had stopped playing, there was noises actually started to come from this wardrobe come bookshelf. And Cynthia was actually inside, using a microphone and a loudspeaker to create feedback. And then she actually started to sing this song a cappella. And we opened the doors and allowed everybody to start to come in. Talk a little bit about what the thoughts behind you being inside were, and how you kind of envisaged the meanings of what you were doing there.
Well, a lot of what I'm doing is talking about time and space. And when it comes to sound, it becomes an even more somewhat contained thought or resonating space. And so when I was inside of this instrument, the feedback was astounding. It was very beautiful. It was very, you could feel it. And then it relates to architecture. The bookshelf itself is just the right size for me to fit in, but it's also, a how do you say, lintel and post and lintel construction. It's very architecturally significant, and it's a piece. You know, it's almost like a music box or a little playhouse or whatever, you know, you might have as a child or something. So it has all of those nostalgic qualities. And then the real part that I think that finished the piece was creating the clouds in the piece, which again makes you dream, or at least alludes to the fact that even a contained space is in subatomic science, a very, very large space. Depends on how you look at things.
It's also a portal in C.S. Lewis, isn't it? The wardrobe. But then the performance went on and you went around and sang to a number of paintings. We'll go to them in a minute. But then you came back and you went back into the wardrobe. And there's a kind of significance in this that relates to the way that in previous performances you used those kind of homemade banjos to sing through, hiding your face. Can you talk a bit about that, just a little bit?
Well, I think going around and I use cover songs not written by me, as found objects and different things like that. And sometimes when I'm singing through the mask or different things, you know, it's carrying somebody else's message, or and we don't always know who wrote certain things or how things formulated. It's sort of like a common trust between everybody in folk music or folk art has that sort of commonality to it, to where you may not know everything about what you're seeing. You know, even these paintings that are thought about and written about and historicized and everything. A mythology gets created in these kinds of stories that get passed on because everybody brings their own spin, or, yeah, I guess we'll just use the word spin. Everything's spinning in a different way, maybe because something's popular at one time or another. So like everything is growing, even when I let go of this work and I'm not on this earth anymore, it's still growing with different people and generations.
Can you tell us a little bit, tell us quickly about the way these prints are put together? They are inkjet prints, and they're actually derived from videos.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about those and how they're made?
These three, not the yellow one, but the three are actual videos of performances that I've done. And each one's titled after the performance that I've done. And in different ones, there's video that's either behind me or in front of me, like this one has it behind and in front of me while I was performing. So it becomes a very sandwiched kind of image. And then when you look at, like this one, for instance, all the yellow is my dress or my outfit. So creating the quilt, just like you would piece together pieces of fabric to create a quilt, you see images of my costume or the video that creates this kaleidoscopic pattern, which is just an image that has been manipulated through a kaleidoscope. And then displayed in like a film strip form, and it's creating a quilted pattern.
Could you call it a form of fractal art?
Definitely.
I think we could do, yeah.
Definitely. Definitely has to be.
And so what we're looking at is actually just a host of individual frames
Right.
taken from the video. So it would be like if you took a length of film and you just exposed the film straight onto the paper. So each one is a kind of small rectangle.
And so you can see here that the objects or my outfit was red. Actually, the outfit you're seeing is the one that's in the self-portrait, the red one. And then when I get done with the video that was shot here, I was in a black dress. So that's going to become one of these eventually. And you'll see parts of the wardrobe and parts of the different paintings that were in the picture of me performing. So when you come up to see the one that gets finished from being here, you'll see this, lovely seascape in the picture, but it'll be fractal.
I hate to acknowledge my ignorance, but I have no idea how an inkjet works. I can't imagine what this is.
It's what you use at home with your computer.
Yeah.
It's just that this is on a kind of more industrial scale. And so through the computer, that information is fed on into the machine, which then it spits ink onto the paper.
But this is not blobby looking or
No.
blotchy, no.
No, it's rather like if you use an inkjet at home, you can do letters, and the letters are very clean.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to just clarify here is that when Cynthia talks about it being like fractals, what she's doing is she's using a kaleidoscopic lens to actually break up each individual image so that they have a kind of symmetry within them, so that you lose the definition of the object, but it's somehow still there. If you look carefully, you can sort of be aware of it. And so it turns these images into pattern. And then strung next to each other, just like you were looking through the frames of a film, they become, row after row after row. They create another structure, which is another kind of visual pattern. And so they're a little like, in a way, they're like a quilt, because what's happening here is that it's retrieved material. Nothing is wasted, if you like. Rather like quilts historically, I think, quilts historically kind of come from the need to conserve and use all of that material because it's expensive and you can't throw it away. So these become things which are rather like that, but it's actually technological material that's being utilised and reused rather than being disposed of.
Is the material spun, like the kaleidoscope?
Nothing's spun except the image is moving.
Okay,
The video is moving in front of the kaleidoscope,
okay.
which makes it seem like, there's movement or actual, but the change is purely from a TV moving, the image is moving.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go and talk about this one up here.
Can I just have, was it meant that there'd only be one of these laser jet prints, or do you anticipate like one of 10, or is there only supposed to be one? Because if it's on a computer, it could be done. It could be done. Yeah. Okay.
How many want to buy one?
Essentially, I've done this before, and there are two
Of each.
of each.
So this piece is called Double Doors, and in Cynthia's work there's continually this idea of things being portals, being places of passage. And this directly, of course, we can see its reference to the fox hunt, but the other reference is actually to Mrs. C, the chase painting. And you might talk a little bit about your response to the chase painting, because you spoke about these at length when you were here the last time, when you were starting to work on this painting.
Well, when I first came here to visit and I was choosing or looking at different things, and I saw the Mrs. C and heard about the Gibson girl and the kind of like movement that happened, or this time, a period where craft art and the sort of Victorian period all kind of coalesced. I was kind of stunned and wanted to address that in the work. Of course, I immediately thought about the length of my skirt, or using a shawl, or different elements like that. And you'll see in a couple of the videos where I'm wearing a shawl. I have a white shawl, and I have used it in other ways. But there was a photographer that had come to my studio a couple of months before I was initiating the project, and he took a picture of me in front of these two doors in my studio, and that's what you see on the front of the brochure. And I was just kind of baffled by the image. It just kind of struck me. And then, so I was presented with this idea that I wanted to mesh the two in the room that are on opposing sides and create a painting in between that would address both pieces. And actually where I grew up in Athens, I remember I have a vivid memory of seeing a fox running through a snowy field. So my reading of the Winslow Homer, it struck a chord with me, so then I addressed the landscape to look more like the bluegrass where I'm from, and adopted the metaphors that I'm using in other pieces of work of the threshold or the doorways, and sort of brought it all together here. And then, right now I'm situated, the painting is looking over to Mrs. C and sort of questioning this idea of the American beauty, and different hymn links have different political resonations, and of course the black evening gloves have address elegance, and that's where it's coming from.
We have a lot of questions. Just very quick questions. These doors, do they relate at all to the mirror board? Because if you look at the mirror board, it seems similar to these doors here.
Yeah, the mirror board, it was very important that the instrument have a door on the back of it. And what came to light through the process of making the work was that it's really these double doors that have been the gift of the work. When you're pursuing an idea and you're challenged by this concept of a door. You'll see in this other video where I'm going in and out of two different doors, kind of like a clock. I think that's important because going through one threshold leads you to another threshold. It's not just one door.
The whole installation then sort of gradually grew into being more than just, say, putting a painting on the wall. And there's a sense in which you've made a sculptural installation here in the middle of a gallery of paintings. And maybe you could talk a bit about, there's a music stand over here, which has the words of a song that you never sing on it. And then the use of, we obviously borrowed this easel from the Academy, although it's kind of beautifully patinated, but it was something that you had in mind in terms of the presentation. Can you talk about the meanings of those things, and also where you got the black doors on the background?
Well, one of my favorite pastimes is sort of antiquing and finding objects, obviously. So when I was coming up with this idea, I originally was, again, thinking about one door and doing a painting on a door. Thankfully, I went and got a canvas and found my self-portrait that I was kind of confused or baffled about the image, and then started painting the image. And even before that, I had written the text because I had pretty much come to visit Philly and talk about the show, and then went home and immediately started writing texts as a part of figuring out what I wanted to do. So The Mortal Rolling Stone is a text that's, if completed as far as like putting it in a form, it could be a song, but it's really not intended to be a song. It's intended to be a text that you look at. And a running theme through my work is talking about taking an anagram from postmoderna with an A and unscrambling it, and it spells out random poets. So I'm talking about painters as poets. I'm talking about, all artists are poets, visual poets, and then extending out to the music world and kind of bringing the sound and the poetry back together again.
I think what we'll do now is I'll explain briefly the other part of what happened on Friday night, and we'll then go round those sections. And what happened when Cindy kind of stepped out from the dulcimer is that the banjo player took us to the Violet Oakley windows, and she sang to the Violet Oakley windows. And then we walked over to another painting and she sang to that. We did this to 6 paintings before she finished, then went back into the wardrobe and waited as long as she could to try and get everybody to disappear and go to the bar. But you could have been in there for hours. People were fascinated and wondering when you were going to come out. Before we go anywhere else, there was something that we discussed just a little earlier, which was about how this performance aspect is not giving a concert. It's not like being a performer on a stage and singing songs and waiting for the applause. It's not that kind of thing. It's actually something quite different, isn't it? And the way that you go around, as you were saying to me, that in fact you were oblivious of the audience being there, even though there was like 70 of us following around. And that it's something quite different from that you become this persona who exists somewhere else. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we'll go and talk about some of the works out there.
One of the aspects of the performance art thinks about is that we're breaking down the fourth wall. And the fourth wall being this, you're the audience and I'm the stage. But it's an interaction with the audience that's more interesting or provoking or breaking down barriers of the proceeding. And so when I'm performing, I have absolutely no expectation of applause, even though I welcome it, it's fine, I like it. But that's not the goal. The goal is not to entertain the audience, and this is where the issue of like charging somebody to come see performance art becomes a slippery slope, because in a sense, when performance artists get together and perform for each other, we're all sharing our soul with each other and what objects we found and how we decided to confront that problem of breaking down the fourth wall. So coming into these galleries, it's almost like, the whole entire space is the performance area. There is no exact backstage or something like that. It's all-encompassing, and the audience is flowing with us to each painting, and it's a much more kind of fluid presentation.
It sounds very spiritual to me.
It's very spiritual.
Okay, let's go over here into this gallery over here. The performance actually consisted of 2 pieces that Cynthia wrote and 3 songs that were written by somebody else, but the 4 videos that exist in the show. This one's called Cleaning Up My Misery, and actually relates to Cindy thinking about this particular piece, a very romantic image of how women really enjoy sweeping the kitchen. They think of anything more romantic. And it can also be very witty, I think, Cynthia's videos, but the music in them is very dirge-like, and I was just starting to think of it being slightly punk, because you use an electric dulcimer, which you actually hammer using chopsticks to get a rhythm. And it gives a very unexpected sort of, it's not what you expect when you think of someone picking up the dulcimer and singing with it. But I was wondering if you could tell us first of all about the song you sang in front of the open windows, and then just a little bit about this and where you made these images, because that's really interesting.
In front of the windows, I sang a song called Free from Hell. And Free from Hell is talking about, life is what you make it, turn your thoughts inside. Life causes all kinds of heartache, you just have to learn to take it. Life is what you make it, life is what you make it. Free from hell, turn your thoughts inside. Because life is what you make it, life is what you make it. And so this piece here was mainly shot in Shakertown. Do you know what Shakers were? Okay, so it was like equality in the sexes and living communally and apart and like being very orientated into your work and craft and creating things that, for lack of a better word, creating sustainability, but through a concept of beauty and Christ returning and finding something that people love as beauty. So in this particular video, here is the room where they make all the rooms, and I'm using that as an image in the video. And then that's the kitchen space, and then the double doors, that's the wall. Here's the double doors going into the kitchen dining room, and then the clock's there in the middle. And then you see the spiral staircases here, which is what they're known for, this kind of symmetry and beauty and balance. And so this is Cleaning My Misery, which I actually wrote. This is the one song in the show, also Free from Hell, that I wrote before the show, for different reasons. And then the other songs I wrote specifically about the paintings in the space here.
Any questions before we move to the next one?
Will we hear anything from this? Maybe first one. No.
Do you mean the one in the other room with the painting? It's actually a silent one. It's almost like the song is the one that's never iterated as a sound. So there's a second video here, which is in response to Mercy's dream, but also there's a painting over here that Cindy sang to. Maybe you could just say something quickly about Mercy's dream, and then we'll go and talk about the painting on the other side.
Well, when I first came here, I was immediately drawn to this picture, Mercy's Dream, and I went and checked out the book, The Pilgrim's Progress, at the library, and started looking at it and researching how I wanted to address it or express my ideas. So I did this piece, which ended up looking a lot like Meshes of the Afternoon, which is a famous filmmaker by Maya Deren, one of the first women filmmakers. And so in her film, she's sort of in a house and she's struggling with these different kinds of aspects of maybe not domesticity, but very cerebral ideas. And so in this piece, I'm walking around a very nice house that's in Louisville, Kentucky, that a friend of mine let me shoot some video. And that's what this piece. Yes, and the shop. This is, I chose this picture because I am referencing ideas of manifest destiny in the first piece. And so I was chose to sing a Stephen Foster song, mainly because he's from Pennsylvania, but he wrote my Kentucky, old Kentucky book. And I wanted to have at least one man in my piece. And it's called Hard Times. Yeah. And so here we have the pilgrims, finding their way to the land. And so I was thinking about hard times coming in more. And that's what
I think what we'll do is let's talk quickly about the other three songs that we did, and then we'll just go quickly look at the other two videos, and then we'll have time. What we did is we went through the other gallery. We could go through that. And ended up with the Harrison and May at the end. But let's go through here.
That's really big. I mean, it's such a big vision. Oh yeah, it wasn't clear. They were redesigned.
I'm sorry, it was so dark. The Monday syndrome. The ever-good mine disaster. And I thought this was particularly exciting. It's interesting too, I'm speaking of Pennsylvania mining and Kentucky mining. Two states that have lots of mining. And so tell us a little bit about just the three songs that you ended with. The very last one was your own that you sang in front of the way, but the other two were songs that you had picked up and appropriated.
This particular song was written by Sarah Oben, who was a labor protester and in Eastern Kentucky. And she wrote a song, I Hate the Capitalist System. And it's very much about, the struggle she had in her life and how capitalism really destroyed everything and killed all of her friends and all these different aspects. So this is a piece that I got to sing to. And it goes, I hate the capitalist system. I'll tell you the reason why. Caused me so much suffering and my dearest friends to die. But on my hard work and low wages, and not enough to eat. Going naked and hungry, no shoes upon my feet.
Yeah.
Then I have a fascination with Duchamp, and I sang Kitchen Man to the picnic with Duchamp over there. Kitchen Man is a song written by Sarah Martin, who's actually from Louisville. It was done and recorded by Bessie Smith. That's where I heard it, was from Bessie Smith's collection of recordings. And it's a song it's really fun to sing. It's almost like in a ragtime kind of way, and it's talking about Madam Lux was quite beloved, servants by the score, but one at each door, mothers and maids galore. But one day Dan, her kitchen man, gave in his notice he's through. She cried, oh Dan, don't go, you'll grieve me if you do. I love his cabbage and crave his hash, Debbie about his succotash. I can't do without my kitchen man.
Did she make him hash? Did she make him hash?
I don't know. I think he made her the food, and she was happy to enjoy it.
Let's go up here and finish off here. About that. I think when I spoke to you, when I gave you the slide lecture, I was telling you about when I was given a CD by Cynthia, and it was the first time I heard her singing. I put it in the slot in the car as I drove up to Chicago, I think it was. My wife and I listened to it over and over again. And it was like a kind of revelation, because at first I sort of went through this process of thinking, well, it's coming from a very musical family, and that intonation drives me nuts to start with. I can't stand to hear children's choir singing because of that. Then, as I started to realise that, in fact, this in some ways was accepting deliberately poor intonation in this music, and that it wasn't about being a professional singer. And I think something I talked to you a bit about that really interested me was the way that it sort of tests our ability to really concentrate and think about listening and understanding meaning, not just as something that's to do with musicality, but actually the culture of music and where it's used and how it's used and so on. And I think I spoke to someone the other night, I think it was one of our art people, about the culture of amateurism, which is part of what Cynthia's been interested in, and how there is this sense in which if we really start to understand things beyond, say, the norms of how we listen to stuff, that when we listen to someone singing, we expect them to be singing a tune in the way that we expect. Then in fact, there is something also about a reference in your work, which is to do with how, in fact, within cultures, groups of people actually just sing to each other, and they don't have to be perfect musicians. And there's a sense in which you did deliberately use that aspect of your voice to promote those kind of notions. Can you talk about that relationship of high art and the notion of the interest that you have in the amateur music world?
Well, I'm fortunate to live in a place in Kentucky where there are so many great musicians and vocalists, people that are very dedicated to their craft. But my abilities are not quite what you would call, I'm not trying to convince you that I'm a good singer, first of all. And I never intended to practice a lot. to practice to be somebody that's going to make a career out of singing in nightclubs or something like that. So my intention is using singing or even just random processes of music and vocalization to simply to deliver text and use it as a storytelling mechanism. So it's more of a mechanical process than like actually, trying to give you pleasure or being in the Grammys or something like that. I have no intention of going that route. In some ways, it's meant to disturb you so that you might pay attention to actually what I'm saying or the meaning in what I'm saying instead of just being pleasing.
The relationship of high and low art, low culture and the culture of amateurism.
Okay. Well, yeah, a lot of what's lost in today's culture is that in the past, people would entertain themselves and get pleasure by singing or participating with their families in the parlors or different things in their homes. Everybody would have like an instrument laying around. These kinds of things are kind of lost to our time and presence. I was always creating instruments that were out of tune. I wasn't even concerned with having in tune. So many, many years of singing out of tune and with out of tune instruments and different things like this. Just the fact that I've done it for so long, I've achieved better and better and better quality, although I'll never quite be, Adele or something. But, many of us are not born that way. So, and then the high and low art, well, for me, I think low art, maybe the kind of folk art, resonates with me. In particular because it's like a passion that you have to do or that you do because it's coming from the heart. It's kind of pure heart making. It might have craft and performance, or for me, is a craft. I look at it and play with those concepts of craft. Folk art doesn't necessarily mean that it's a refined craft, but if you actually go to Kentucky and see our crafts, we have very, very nice crafts compared to most places. So there's always been that kind of play with where I'm from and different things. Okay. Ninny, my persona, is actually a derivative of many kinds of concepts, like Memphis Minnie, or you could even say Mickey and Minnie Mouse. The word Minnie. But I'm using specifically the word Ninny because I am talking about how to be as unpretentious when I enter this space as I can be. So many times people have called me like Minnie Pearl, or a figure that's very much like Minnie Pearl, which I definitely condone. And I wasn't so concerned with her initially. I was more concerned with Loretta Lynn and Bessie Smith more than Minnie Pearl. But since the costumes became more of a square dance costume, and then the price tags and different things, and talking about economy, all of that was a very welcome perception. And when I was younger, I was traveling around with a country music band called the Kentucky Headhunters. You might have heard of them. But they took me to Fanfare, which is actually the stockyards in Nashville, where all these people come together and they have a little booth set up, and you can meet your country music star. And sometimes they would create these elaborate guitars and different things where you could meet the star, but you're not completely in their space. Like there's a distance between the public and private space. So on top of that, Minnie is actually somebody that is, there's a lot of country fictional legends. There are people that pretend to be country stars when in fact they really aren't, and they don't sing good and whatever. They just really enjoy pretending to be one, and that is where Minnie started out. She pretended and fictionalized, and that is one thing about using a persona, is that you can add fiction and you're not always addressing the personal. It's like, could be, you could play around with many different ideas.
Can you comment on the relationship between your video and Benjamin West?
Well, I do a lot of anagrams, and colonialism is the anagram that I took apart and I spelt out and wrote a song called So Co-Liminal. And liminality is, again, referencing what is considered to be a threshold or something. It's the space in between and around things. And in anthropologic terms, liminality is a very poignant word, especially in the time we live in. And so what I was addressing is the fact that what I'm pointing out is that both of these cultures are colliding in a space, in a time where, you know, they are both on the threshold of something really new. There's an inequality, of course, happening here, because you have people with like more, I wouldn't say, you know, better technology than the Indians, but actually like a different time schedule, a different, you know, textiles and industrialization is quite a different time frame than where the Indians are coming from, where they make everything from the fibers that they have available. So there's two different time thresholds interacting in this part. So.
I was going to ask you to just give a few last words about, there's one on the other side, which we won't wander over there because we're running out of time, but which is Mr. Peel's glasses, and you were quite taken with the room of the Peels, weren't you?
Well, this tends to be the school of self-portraits, and the Mr. Peel's spectacles and the fact that he has created this self-portrait that's very theatrical with the curtain and all of that. I just was instantly interested in playing with that kind of concept and the word spectacle as a pun and a double meaning. And so the way I resolved it, I just kept imagining this kind of canoe trip and me presenting myself in my own video portrait, self-portrait, and talking about how that is a vehicle of time. Paintings are vehicles of time. We're here talking about all these people that are intentionally on the wall, placed in time.
So, any questions? Finally finished, yeah?
If I may make a comment, when you were sharing with us in the other room with the lady with the broom, personally, I got a feeling that you almost do channeling. You know, I mean, it was like I could just picture this woman singing or saying this this song to someone, expressing her feelings. It was a very
That's very
interesting
nice.
feeling.
Yeah, I think anytime you're dealing with performative aspects and with space, and you definitely are working with the energy that's in a room or the energy that's around you and the other people that are coming together. So that's a very big part of what performance art is for me, in a sense.
Where do you take it from here?
Where we go from here?
She's off.
Another curator said to me the other night, Baltimore.
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to figure out maybe another venue or another place, but I would completely love to do this in as many museums as possible and continue to do the work. My initial reaction to going back home is a little vacation and recording some more music, because I had really enjoyed finishing the songs, and I have a whole nother installation that I want to finish. I have like 4 or 5 projects I need to work on, and then trying to get this kind of work in another museum is definitely the next step.
Can you do the,
Well, thank you.
Dare
can
we
you do the
clap?
large class?
Are we allowed to say?
Yeah.
Are we allowed to clap?
Yes, thank you, Jane.